Well, welcome everybody. My name is John. I'm a recovered alcoholic.
Morning, John.
Morning, John.
I announce myself as recovered in accordance with page 90 of the AA Big Book. Welcome to the Alcoholics Anonymous Key to Our Future Wednesday morning workshop of the fourth column, fourth dimension group. I am your speaker this morning. If the workshop finishes early, we'll use the remaining time as a general discussion based on the workshop topic. Would all who care to join me in a moment of silence for those that are still sick and suffering? Let's say the set aside prayer together. God, please help me set aside everything I think I know about myself, my disease, these steps, and especially you, for an open mind in a new experience with myself, my disease, these steps, and especially you. Show me the way of patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. Amen. Our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to the causes and conditions. Big Book, page 64. It does not matter what substances you may or may not have used. They are all different. But the solution is always the same. The proper application of the 12 steps is presented in the Big Book. And always remember, contempt prior to investigation is a bar against all knowledge. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. Does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. And I've asked Ryan to read the 12 traditions.
Hey everybody, my name is Ryan. I'm a gratefully recovered alcoholic.
Hey Ryan.
The 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. 1. Our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends on AA unity. 2. For a group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority. A loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants, they do not govern. 3. The only requirement for AA membership is the desire to stop drinking. 4. Each group should be autonomous, except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. 5. Each group has but one primary purpose, to carry this message to the alcoholic who still suffers. 6. An AA group ought never endorse, finance, or lend the AA name to any related facility or outside enterprise, lest problems of money, property, and prestige divert us from our primary purpose. 7. Every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. 8. Alcoholics Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but our service centers may employ special workers. 9. AA as such ought never be organized, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those they serve. 10. Alcoholics Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues. Its AA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. 11. Our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need to always maintain personal anonymity at the level of thrust ready on film. And 12. Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities.
Thank you, Ryan. And Ross has agreed to read a portion of page 28.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ross. I'm a grateful recovered alcoholic.
Hey, Ross.
The designated American psychologist William James, in his book Varieties of a Religious Experience, indicates a multitude of ways in which men have discovered God. We have no desire to convince anyone that there is only one way by which faith can be acquired. If what we have learned and felt and seen means anything at all, it means that all of us, whatever our race, creed, or color, are the children of a living Creator with whom we may form a relationship upon simple and understandable terms as soon as we are willing and honest enough to try. Those having religious affiliations will find here nothing disturbing to their beliefs or ceremonies. There is no friction among us over such matters. We think it no concern of ours what religious bodies our members identify themselves with as individuals. This should be an entirely personal affair which each one decides for himself in the light of past associations or his present choice. Not all of us join religious bodies, but most of us favor such memberships. Big Book, page 28.
Thank you, Ross. All right. Well, again, I'm John. I'm a grateful recovered alcoholic. And today's meeting is entitled The Key to Our Future. And that comes from page 66 at the bottom of the page, where it talks about the key to the future. And I always like to ask the question to anyone, do you think it means that?
Sure.
Well, if it does, if it means this is the key to our future, then it's pretty important. It's like I get the visual on this of a locked door that's not going to open unless I get this key. If I don't understand this key properly, much like having a key that's close but not a fit, that door's not going to open for me. So that statement has a lot of meaning to me personally, that I probably better get this part of the program right, or this is the end of the road for my recovery. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump over in the chapter, How It Works, and we're going to look at page 62 real quick. And I'm going to read that first paragraph on page 62. You can join me in this reading. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows, and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us, seemingly without provocation. But we invariably find that at some time in the past we have made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. So we think our troubles are of our own I'm sorry for getting kind of choppy on that. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. God makes that possible. And there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without His aid. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. So let's take a moment to just really look at what this is trying to tell us. That our real problem and our troubles are not made by alcohol or drugs. Our real problems are rooted in selfishness. Now that kind of ties into our previous discussions that we've had this week about antisocial personality disorder and how we are self-centered and egocentric. That throughout our lifetime, we've based our decisions on how it's going to affect me. And that's why this egocentric thing really applies to our disease so strongly, and we don't even realize it, that every decision I ever made was based on what's the outcome and how is it going to benefit me? How am I going to get my way? Even in times that we were being kind and loving, we were thinking about how I'm going to get some credit or recognition for this love or care that I'm showing someone. It also tells me that this selfishness is driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. So it's driven by fear. The delusion that if I get what I want, then somehow that's going to make life better. And yet, how often in life have we found that getting what we wanted didn't actually provide the results we wanted, didn't provide the happiness and joyousness we were seeking. It goes on to tell us, and there are a couple of death threats in here. It says, above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. It doesn't say alcohol is going to kill you. It says selfishness is going to kill you. It's a pretty important point. And it says above everything there. So it means above all. Out of the gate, this selfishness will kill us. Then it goes on to say, we must be rid of this selfishness. But we can't get rid of it without God's aid. It means we're going to have to turn to something different than we used in the past. It doesn't say I get sobered up, get dried up, get to feeling better, and get a good job. Those are not the instructions. Though we want to be a productive part of society, those are not the instructions for recovery. And yet, how quickly our mind wants to tell us something like that. That I get to feeling better, I go make a lot of money, and somehow I'll be able to patch this thing together. And then we find ourselves either mean, mad, and miserable, or on drugs or alcohol again. So we have to turn to something greater. And we talked about it in yesterday's discussion quite a bit. It can't be those things that we find on page 53 and 54. It can't be things. It can't be money. It can't be sentiment. It can't be ourselves. It can't be the worship of other people. And it certainly can't be the faith that we had previously put into our God of reason. So we're starting to step into the world of spirit by this point, and we're emphasizing here on page 62 that stepping into the world of spirit involves a selflessness, an altruistic approach to life. So, the next portion of this is what we call our third step statement on page 63. Now, the reason we call it the third step statement is because it's really not so much a prayer as it is a statement that we're making to God. That we are now ready to have Him build with us as He will. Now, what I don't understand a lot of times, or I didn't for a long time, let me put it that way. What I didn't understand for a long time is this is telling me that He's going to have to build something with me. Now, considering the fact that I'm not a little kid anymore, and I've had a life of building things the way I wanted them, and those structures were not strong structures. They weren't good structures. They were hazardous structures. A lot of that old structure has to be torn down, just like if you were going into the inner city and tearing down an old burnt-out building and getting down to a good foundation, and then God can rebuild on that. So a lot of times this involves some unpleasantness because, the structures I've built, well, I kind of liked them because I built them, Whether they were serving me well or not, it hasn't always been my question. They were something I'd grown fond of. My old ideas, my old emotions, my old attitudes. As we read about in our previous meeting on page 27. Those are the things that I built. Ideas, attitudes, and emotions. And the structure has not worked out all that well because look at the results that it produced. So if I'm going to keep that old structure of old ideas, old attitudes, old emotions, then I'm probably going to get the same results that I got before. Because it's told me here on page 62, drugs and alcohol are not my problem, selfishness is. He goes on to say here on page 63, that we're asking that we be relieved of the bondage of self. So we've been slaves. We have been put in a position that it's a bondage. I visualize this as kind of like being in shackles. Only these are shackles I get to carry in every daily activity that I get involved with, and that is self. Self is just on me all the time when I'm an untreated alcoholic. So I'm asking God to remove this bondage of self. Then I go ahead and say, take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help. So my difficulties are probably not what I was thinking. I was thinking my difficulty was I didn't have enough money in my bank account. My difficulty was that I didn't have the right kind of automobile, or I didn't have the right kind of relationship. But that's not the difficulties that we're talking about. We're talking about the difficulties in our thinking selfishly. Our difficulties with our, again, ideas, emotions, and attitudes. Think about that for a moment. My difficulties are not material. They're spiritual. They're the spirit by which I've been living. The spirit of selfishness. And then I'm, of course, ending this statement by saying, God, I want it to be by your power, your love, and your way of life. I don't think God's way of life is the way I'd been doing it before I found true, lasting sobriety. I've been doing my way. And my way was, for the most part, the exact opposite of God's. So let's move on over to page 64, and we're going to read some real important stuff on this page. Because this is where we start talking about this moral inventory. Now, first thing I want to point out is we call it a moral inventory. We don't call it an immoral inventory. This is not about listing all the things that you've done bad in your life and wanting to straighten that out. That is another step of the program, but it's not the fourth step. This is your moral inventory, and critical to this particular portion is understanding what we're doing. I have a certain set of morals. It told me that on page 62. I had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but I could not live up to them even though I wanted to. Well, those same moral and philosophical convictions that I have, not only do I embrace them and tell myself they are very, very important to me, but what I've also been doing is imposing those morals and philosophical convictions on other people. This is where the problem comes in. This is a moral inventory. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit of further explanation. When you don't behave the way my morals say you should behave, then I get resentful. Now, the insanity of it is a lot of times I was living up to absolutely no morals at all. I was disturbing my family, disturbing my loved ones. I wasn't living up to the morals I would have liked to have lived up to. But for other people, I really was hard on them. I expected them to live up to the moral standards that I believed to be best. When they didn't, I got resentful. So a big part of this process and this inventory is recognizing my job is to live and let live. To let you live your life the way you want to. Even if we're in a very close relationship. Because I'm not playing God. Remember, we took care of that a couple of pages back. We had to quit playing God. On page 60. 61. We had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Well, this is where we get the tools to quit playing God here. It becomes more than words to AA members. So we heard the words, quit playing God. Now we're learning how. I don't impose my morals on you. I don't tell you how to live, what to do, how to do it. Now I'm going to make an important exception here. Obviously, if I have somebody that is harming me or harming a company that I'm with or something like that, that doesn't mean I have to allow them to harm that company. I can disapprove of their behavior and I can ask an employee to leave the company. There are certain things that I can stick with. This is affecting me or it's affecting my company in a real way, something I could write down or take a picture of, and I could ask a person to leave that company. So we're not saying we have to become people that are allowing ourselves or others to be harmed by another individual. What I'm really looking at here is I don't need to impose my values on somebody. Let's just say that we have a family member that's not doing what we want. They've joined up with some kind of group or cult or something we don't like. I can let them know what my view is, but for me to throw down on them verbally and tell them that hateful words and so forth and be irritated and resentful, well, then I'm getting in a position that it's not going to be them that are out there with the drink in their hand or the needle in their arm. It's going to be me, because that resentment is eating me up. So that just gives you an idea of what we're really talking about here is to stop that imposing my morals on other people. It's going to do me a lot more good than anything else I can do in this program as far as a freedom of the bondage of self. So the next thing is, we're going to talk about when we start upon this moral inventory. And I'm going to read this off of page 64. It says, therefore we started upon a personal inventory. This was step 4. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding, fact-facing process. It is an effort to discover the truth about the stock in trade. One object is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods, to get rid of them promptly and without regret. If the owner of a business is to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. We did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup, which caused our failure. Being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, was what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestations. Well, that's real important here. Let's just say I have a store, like a bakery, and I've got bread on the shelves and everything of that nature. If I don't get rid of the unsellable goods, that moldy bread, then that store's not going to last long. It's going to go broke. Got to get rid of the unsellable goods. This also tells me this is a fact-finding and fact-facing process. That's real important. You'll hear a lot of people in the program, especially our watered-down type groups, that will tell you, well, if you don't remember it, it really doesn't matter. Well, some of that's true. You don't want to sit there and try to remember memories you don't have, obviously. If it's not there, it's not there. But it is a fact-finding process. That means this is pretty thorough. I want to find facts about myself. I want to look into what it is that's inside of me that's an unsellable good. And I want to get it off the shelves. I want to dispose of it promptly, without regret. We know what those can be. They can fall into those same categories: ideas, emotions, and attitudes. For me personally, my emotion of anger was one that I had to dispose of. I had to get rid of that. Now it goes on to tell us a little bit about this. We look at a flaw list. What it's saying here is we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure. Now this flaw list is really something I take a little more seriously than anyone in the program that I'm familiar with, except for Clarence Snyder. Clarence Snyder created a list of 20 items that were these flaws. And it's the first thing that he would have his sponsees and those he's working with go through. Now, what's interesting and why I trust Clarence Snyder, he started the very first AA group in history, the very first group that was called Alcoholics Anonymous, named after the book. Clarence Snyder started that. And it is said and pretty well documented that 3 years after he had got that group started, 93% of the people that came into that AA meeting, the first AA meeting, were still sober 3 years down the road. So I tend to trust Clarence Snyder. Now, you might ask yourself this, for those of you who've made some AA meetings and so forth in the past, have you ever heard of Clarence Snyder? Well, not that many people have. And yet, he started the very first group that was named Alcoholics Anonymous. That might clue you in on how much other material you might miss hanging around your typical watered-down AA. It's our job to have some information like this, to bring it to a meeting that may have gotten a little diluted over the years. Start sharing out of the book, sharing what the history is, because, you know, back there in those days, they had very high success rates. In Akron, Ohio, they darn near had 100% success rate. In Cleveland, 93%. New York, 75%. I don't know what it is today, but I know it's not 93%. So that's the difference in what's happening with you in your AA program today versus what's happening out there in the general populace of AA. Is you're being introduced to these same principles. So, back to the page here, our flaw list. Well, there are about 20 items, and it includes everything from laziness to self-condemnation. It's how our flaws in our character have manifested in various ways. How self has manifested. So this is a pretty large list. The next thing, in this next paragraph, it talks about resentment. It says, resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. For we have not only, for we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. We asked ourselves why we were angry. In most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbook, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So we were sore. We were burned up. Well, let's look at that. It starts out with the word resentment, doesn't it, in this paragraph? Who in the room can share with me what the definition of resentment is? Go ahead, Ryan.
To refill. To refill something, to bring it up from the past.
To
like experience it again.
Okay, to refill something.
Mm-hmm.
Thought for a minute there you were talking about like a refill in a soda. It's kind of that way. I'm going to get a refill on that hanger. I'll go back for seconds. You may have woken me up to a little bit of a new angle on that. I'm going to get me a refill. But yeah, to refill it is one element of it. And ultimately, if we get down to what resentment is, it's this feeling of injustice. And that ties into what we were talking about just a moment ago, doesn't it? That you violated my morals, my moral and my philosophies. I don't like the way you're behaving. I don't like what you did. I've judged you. And I'm really, really angry about it. And I can keep reenacting this in my mind over and over again to re-feel it. And my body doesn't really know there's any difference, does it? The first time I was angry, I felt my blood pressure and my adrenaline and everything rise. Well, the 50th time I re-feel it, the same thing's happening. So I'm really hurting myself physically, emotionally, and in other ways, spiritually. Now, it tells me here, for these people who want to differentiate anger, because anger is also an addiction. And I will tell you, it was one of my favorites. I enjoyed a good bout of anger occasionally. There are a lot of people who want to ignore this anger thing in our book. Or they want to pretend like resentment and anger are really not tied that closely together. But here in this one paragraph, it starts with the word resentment, tells us it's the number one offender. It's top of the list. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. And then it tells us about anger. It said we had to ask ourselves who we were angry at. Whom had offended us? And we had to ask ourselves why. So twice in one paragraph, it associates the word anger with resentment. So I think anyone who says, oh, we're just going to get angry, there's no way to get around that, it's human nature, is probably diluting the program. They're probably not actually living the program. Now, I'm not saying they're going to run out and get drunk because they have a principle that it's okay to get angry once in a while. What I am saying is they're probably not going to get the full effect of recovery. And yes, they may go out and get drunk over that one element being left out. That it's okay to get angry. Now, when I'm talking with sponsees and so forth, many of them talk about, well, I don't see how I could ever go without being angry. And I just remind them, a few days ago, you couldn't see how you could go without shooting up heroin or drinking Jack Daniels. There's a lot of things in this world that you can't see yourself going without that are perfectly plausible that you could live the rest of your life without those things. Anger happens to be one of those. Now, to qualify that, does that mean I'm going to approve of everything everybody's doing? Absolutely not. There are going to be things in this life I don't approve of. There are going to be a lot of them. But anger, that feeling of disturbance inside, that doesn't have to go along with my strong sense of disapproval. Now, there are some people that say, well, that's a natural feeling. I know I sound like I'm repeating myself, but they'll say, as long as I don't act out on it, it's okay. No, it's not the acting out on anger that got you drunk. It's the feeling. It's that gut-wrenching spring that is tightening up from that anger over and over again, we call resentment, that you eventually have to find something to stop that gut-wrenching feeling of anger that's inside. So it's the feeling that's important here. It's not the acting out on it. Now, obviously, we don't want to act out on it. If it's cropped up on us, we don't want to act out on it. But this is not just about that part of it. This is about, how do I diffuse that feeling? Because it's me living with that feeling in my private moment that leads me to the next drink. So that's some pretty big stuff that we're looking at here. We're talking about a life free of anger. Yet having to keep policies, procedures at companies, do things right, tolerate people. But that's why we're entering the world of spirit, because that anger is likened unto a spirit that's inside of us. We've got that turmoil inside. That spirit begins to drive us. So what does it tell us here? That we have been affected. We found that it's our self-esteem, our pocketbook, our ambitions, personal relationships that have been hurt or threatened. So I can just have a threat towards it, and I'm forming a resentment. It tells us about Mr. Brown here. Now, if you'll notice, there are 19 words describing Mr. Brown. It's talking about I am resentful at, the cause, and it affects my. That tells me I don't write a story about these resentments. It tells me that I don't, there are a lot of sponsees out there that talk about writing your story. Write it down in the form of a story. No, I'm not writing this down in the form of a story at this stage. What I'm doing is listing who it is that I'm resentful at, the cause, what they did, and then how it affects me. And then in brackets out to the side, you notice it says fear, fear, and fear. Well, because that's usually what underlies all of this other problem. Fear tends to be that driving force. So now that I've got my list made, let's presume you've done a real nice job like this list here on page 65. We jump over to page 66, and it tells us a little bit about what's obvious to anyone, and that is, it's plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile. But with the alcoholic, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it is fatal. For when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns, and we drink again. And with us, to drink is to die. Now examine that for a moment. We've just had another death threat. We don't get this thing right. What's going to happen? We're going to die. But it also makes some other points right up in the beginning of this paragraph that it's plain to see. So that means this is not difficult for one to understand that resentment, anger, lead to futility and unhappiness. And then it goes on to say in this next sentence, to the precise extent that we permit these. So it actually tells me by that statement of permit, I am actually permitting myself to get angry. I am permitting myself to have resentment. And that's why I really like to point out to anyone that I'm working with is this concept that I have no control over getting really angry sometimes. I have no ability to avoid that. Is just simply not true. We are permitting ourselves to have resentment. It also tells us that we're squandering the hours that might have been worthwhile. Squander is a pretty good word, in the fact that squander is like, man, I know the value of my money, but I went and squandered it. I know the value of my time. I know the value of my life, and I'm squandering it. So I'm permitting myself to squander my life by having resentment and anger. Now, if you get that down, you've made huge progress beyond that of many, many people that are trying to find a recovered life. When we can accept as readily that we can't be angry anymore as quickly as we do that I can't drink anymore, and we don't go along with the crowd that say, well, everybody gets angry, or there is righteous anger, that kind of stuff. We don't go along with that. Why? Because it tells us in the next sentence, but with the alcoholic. It doesn't say with the normal person, but it does say, but with the alcoholic whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment / anger. Now you notice I added the / anger, but we saw where that fits right in on the previous page, is infinitely grave. We found that it's fatal. That's another death threat there. So anger equals death to you and I. Are you with me? So that means some huge things are going to change for us to actually be able to call ourselves recovered alcoholics. We're talking about ideas, the idea that I could get angry and have resentments like normal folks, the emotion that I can feel that and not get a very negative and possibly fatal response. That's going to have to change, and my attitude, my belief that that's just how it is. I'm going to have to do this for the remainder of my life, that I have no control over these angry feelings. Those ideas, attitudes, and emotions have to be cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions have to replace them, like we read on page 27. I have to start accepting that I don't get to be resentful anymore. It's the number one offender. It destroys more of us than anything else. I've got to start embracing that new concept that me being mad at you is going to kill me. Now, if I'm getting this part of the program, I'm starting to recover. Because, well, can anyone tell me, just real quickly, why that is a true statement? If I'm getting this part of the program, I'm beginning to recover.
Well, you realize the selfishness and resentment gives you a death threat if you don't overcome it. No, it's not a threat, it's a reality.
Okay, good point. Anybody else want to comment on that? Why is this, when I start understanding that resentment and anger have to be eliminated, my ideas about that? Yes, sir.
Because that's when a vital spiritual experience is coming on to you.
Good one. Both of you are absolutely correct. And it really is this basis, because if resentment is really what destroys more alcoholics than anything else, then I've got to get rid of that. This is, okay, I've showed up at a meeting and I've got a few days or a few weeks or maybe a few months of recovery. I've got rid of the Jack Daniels or the methamphetamine or whatever it was that I was out there doing. Now I'm starting to get to what it tells us over here on page 64, the causes and conditions. What causes me to drink? What is the condition that leads to this insanity? Well, it's giving me really clear instructions on a couple of pages. Why am I emphasizing this so much? Why am I belaboring this point? because this is what our disease wants to ignore, because this is our disease. It's anger. It's resentment. That's our disease. It wants us to jump over this, leap over and say, everybody gets angry. And go on with more justification, more rationalization. So yes, I'm going to belabor this point. Because if you don't get this, then you might stay sober 10 years. And then I get to see you 10 years down the road at the hospital. And I got to thinking to myself, well, darn, maybe I should have emphasized that part about resentment. Because it was his resentment at his wife that led to this. It was his resentment at his kid that led to this. It was resentment at his boss. Got angry that day. Didn't realize it was a problem. 3 weeks later, he had a drink in his hand and didn't know why. Okay. So, we're treating a disease. Normal people can get angry, by the way. We're not saying any more than I'm trying to reform the world against alcohol and drugs, because I'm not out here to stop everybody from using alcohol and drugs. I'm not out to stop everybody from enjoying them a little bit of anger from time to time. But I am telling you, if you're an alcoholic, you can't drink and you can't get angry. Those are luxuries of normal people. And we're going to read that in this next paragraph. It says, in the next paragraph on page 66, if we were to live, we had to be free of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. They may be the dubious luxury of normal men, but for the alcoholic, these things are poison. A couple of more death threats in there, huh? If you're going to live, you got to be free of anger. Now, tell me, isn't that amazing how our minds can take that little sentence and say, well, it says be free of anger. That doesn't mean I'm never going to have anger. I mean, I've actually heard people say, it's pretty clear. I don't think you can get any clearer than you got to be free of it. That bondage of self, the bondage of anger, you've got to be free. It says the grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. A grouch, we all know what a grouchy person is, don't we? Well, at the time this book was written, a brainstorm meant something a little different than it does now. A brainstorm is a sudden outburst of rage. If you look at a 1940 dictionary, you're going to see a different definition of brainstorm than what our current definition is. Brainstorming has become to be known as a group of people sitting around coming up with ideas. And it was Walt Disney that came up with that term. He coined that term for what his team would do. We were brainstorming. But what it means in this context is rage. You ever had that? You're just flown off the handle. You are ready to hurt somebody. I mean, yeah, I've done it. By golly, done it more than once. Done it enough to absolutely be ashamed. But you know, it's been a long, long time. Because we don't have to have that any more than I have to have Jack Daniels in a glass in front of me. Okay, so it's telling me a lot about this. Now, the next part of this, we know our meeting's called Key to the Future, right? Well, we're going to read about that in this next paragraph. We turn back to the list. Of course, the list we're talking about is this list on page 65, the one that we've created. It's done just like the one on 65. We turn back to our list now, for it held the key to the future. I asked in the beginning, do you think it means that?
Sure does.
This is the key. This is the key to getting all this freedom that we're looking for. It tells us we're prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. That means instead of looking at Mr. Brown here, and we'll just kind of go through this real quick, where it says, I am resentful at Mr. Brown. So I'll just put myself in a kind of first person singular here. I, John, am resentful at Mr. Brown. The cause that I, John, am resentful at him is his attention to my wife. He's flirting with my wife, okay? Being nice to her, stuff like that. and it's affecting my sex relations. It's threatening my sex relations. Mr. Brown has also done a couple of other things that my morals say you're not supposed to do. My morals and my philosophy say here under the cause that he told my wife about my mistress. Brothers are supposed to be brothers, or my morals, right? You're supposed to keep my secrets. I wouldn't tell on you. How dare you tell on me? You see, that's anger, that's resentment. And of course, for the average person, you do get angry about that. But for us, we remember, anger's poison. Now, it's affecting my self-esteem, my sex relations, my security. And then it says that Mr. Brown may get my job at the office. So, back to page 66, I'm looking at it from an entirely different angle. What's this different angle? Well, Mr. Brown is paying attention to my wife because I'm not. Okay? I need to pay more attention to my wife. That's what that translates to in reality. When I step out of the delusion, it means I, her husband, need to pay more attention to her. He told my wife about my mistress. Well, I'm a married man. I shouldn't have a mistress. So I'm looking at it from an entirely different angle. How can I be mad at this dude? He wouldn't be able to say anything to my wife if I didn't have a mistress. So I placed myself in a position to be hurt. Remember when we read that on the previous page? I'm the one at fault here. It's not Mr. Brown. He has every right to tell my wife about my mistress. In fact, if she had a boyfriend, I'd want Mr. Brown to let me know. I'm looking at it from an entirely different angle now, right? A different angle. A sane angle. And the fact that he may get my job at the office, well, that sounds like something that's only going to happen to somebody who's not doing their job. Because if I'm doing my job, I'm a key employee, and I'm doing it great, people are probably not going to take my job. I'm doing something here that's wrong. I'm making my boss mad. I'm maybe slacking, showing up late, but something's happening. So now that I look at it from an entirely different angle, I see what's going on. I make my little story there. Well, I'm showing up to work late, several days a month. I tell my boss things that I shouldn't tell my boss. And, I'm a little bit arrogant about it. That's why I'm insecure. And that's why Mr. Brown might get my job. And truth is, if I keep going, he's probably more qualified to have my job and my wife than I am. Now, I don't necessarily have to be drunk for all this to be happening either. I can do this stuff stone cold sober. Because we're not talking about being drunk and being angry. Being drunk and being resentful. What we're talking about is resentment. And it doesn't say resentment destroys more alcoholics than anything else. Only when they're drinking, it says it destroys more alcoholics than anything else. And it talks about we're going to drink again. So it's presuming that we've already stopped. We're in a sober state of mind, right? You remember that part on the previous pages? And he will drink again. And if he drinks, he's surely going to die. So it's assuming we're already sober. So this is dealing with the guy who's off the dope. That's off the alcohol. Now, this is 2017. Right now, in 10 years, I want you to examine out of all the AA meetings you go to, how many people point that out in a meeting when you're on this topic. Probably won't be anybody but you. That's how precious this information is. I mean, it's almost like, to me, we've pulled the scroll off the old shelf that's in the cave and blown the dust off the top, and we're getting back to the secret, sacred method of staying sober and happy. You are being included in that valuable information. And that is 10 years from now. That's a lot of meetings, isn't it? I'm presuming you're going to make meetings. See how many people point out clearly that we're talking about a sober individual when we're talking about all of this. Because it's talking about right here. If he does, he will drink again. And for us, to drink is to die. So we're dealing with the spiritual now. We're starting to understand this has very little to do with the booze, has very little to do with the dope, has very little to do with the material stuff. We're dealing with this spirit of anger. That's the cause of our addiction. It tells me that on 62. Got to get down to the causes and conditions. On the same page, it says resentment. I know I've belabored this, guys. I think it's important, though. Because if we miss this part, there's nothing else. We've missed the program. So we're getting down to the number one offender. We're going to wrap it up here in the next couple of minutes at how to deal with this in these next pages. You will see that we've already talked about the grudge list. Look at the whiteboard here entitled The Key to the Future. And it says awareness, number one. And in the subsection, it gives us our list. We have a grudge list. We saw that one. That's the one with Mr. Brown. Well, we have a forgiveness list that's talked about on page 67. I'm not going to read page 67, but I can promise you what it's talking about is the sick man prayer. And it doesn't just say pray for the people that you used to be mad at. It's doing two things. It's telling us, one, we've got to get over all the anger and everything. We've got to forgive all of those people we were angry at, looking at it from an entirely different angle. And we've got to apply that to every incident for the rest of our lives. Okay? So forgiveness. It's a forgiveness list that we actually put it in black and white when we're doing things correctly. We pray for those people a bunch that have upset us in the past because it's taken years to deal with. So we'll pray day after day for about 12 to 15 days for each one of those people to forgive them. And then we make sure that we're praying for the next person that's starting to get in our craw a little bit to make sure we don't start developing a list again. We have a fear list. A fear list is my fear of being lonely, my fear of spiders, my fear of government, my fear of IRS, any fear I have, anything that's associated with fear. Now, real quick, let's distinguish the difference between a warning and a fear. I hear this term thrown around AA meetings, there's healthy fear and there's unhealthy fear. Well, for our purposes here, fear is like one of those words like love, okay? I can love donuts and I can love my wife. Those are two very different things, aren't they? So fear is one of those words we have to get down what our definition is for the purpose of recovery. What we're talking about here is the imaginary, psychological, in our brain, kind of I'm afraid of things that aren't going to happen stuff. Or I'm imagining them being much worse than they're actually going to be. We're not talking about the warnings that if I do go take a drink, I'm probably going to get drunk and it's probably going to be bad. That's not a fear. You know, that's a warning. So for our purpose and our definition of this book, we want to understand the difference between a caution and a fear. In this case, it's the imaginary fear. Okay. The sex list. It tells us not so much that we need to list all the people we've had sex with, because that's not the point. It's not an inventory of who I've done the deal with. What this is who have I been inconsiderate to? Who have I created bitterness with? Who have I harmed, to put it all in a nutshell? Where have I been selfish?
I get that conduct inventory down, and I start seeing a pattern of who I've harmed. Then at that point, I realize what selfishness has led to in my relationships. I develop a sane, sound sex ideal. Sane, we know what that word means. It means it's sane. It's actual sanity. Hanging out with other men's wives, that's probably not sane, is it?
Not safe either.
Okay. Probably having casual sex, probably not sane. Probably having unprotected casual sex is not sane. There are people that die from that. So I start getting sane, and I'm writing this down. Who it is, when it's appropriate, why I'm going to be doing it. A little bit of brain juice goes into this. What's sane? Sound. Sound means I've got something that is actually able to endure. It's a sound idea. It's telling us this on page 69. Sane, sound, sex, and then the word ideal with an L, not an idea. What does ideal mean? Well,
Perfect condition?
absolutely. It means my ideal is the ideal way. It's like I said, this is the ideal automobile. That means it's just perfect for me. It is just ideal. This is an ideal home to live in. This is an ideal way to think. He did an ideal job in presenting that lecture. I mean, it's right up there where it's just short of saying perfect. It means it's the best that you could possibly imagine. That's your ideal. Now, that is for you. For example, there are people that are going to have differences in beliefs. If someday you sponsor somebody of a different religious group or a different nationality, their ideal might be something like having 4 wives. You know? Now, I'm not going to say that would work well for me, but that's their ideal, right? And it's legal in their country, and that's their religion. You better watch out. You might knock that painting down. So I'm not going to say your ideal has to agree with my ideal, because there are different ideals that are out there. So again, I'm not over here with my moral and philosophical convictions galore starting to impose my values on you. What I'm asking, and what the book is asking from us, is to get our sane, sound ideal together on sex. Once I've done that, I try to live up to it. On page 70, it tells me that if I fall short, there's a certain prescription to dealing with that. Page 70, it says, suppose I fall short of my chosen ideal. If I'm honestly sorry and I ask God to take me to better things, then we probably won't drink. If we're not, we probably will. In fact, it says we will. And it says we're not theorizing about this. These are facts from our experience. So you want to go mess up your recovery after 2 or 3 years? It's just going great. Go break your own ideal. And you'll probably drink again. You'll probably say, how the heck did that happen? I thought I could get away with it. Just remember, wherever you go, you are there. Okay, and then finally, we've got an amends list. And that's that list we all want to do. And that's the one we usually think of way back in the beginning. The amends list. Oh, the people I've harmed. I want to make amends. Well, everybody comes in to AA, and that's the first thing they want to do, is they want to get their amends list. They want to make amends. That's natural, right? But it's way down here. And then it tells us that it's going to take some time for us to get these amends made. Even a person who doesn't have huge list is probably going to be straddled with taking some time, a couple of years, to really get all those relationships and everything restored to what they were. What can that mean? That can mean things like remembering birthdays. So you can let people know you do remember birthdays now. It can be things like going and visiting family members you haven't seen in a while because you were a little bit estranged from them because of the drug or alcohol use. What can it mean? It can mean financial amends. It can mean that if you have a huge amount of financial amends, it can take the rest of your life. One of our guys, Mark H., took him 17 years to get all of his amends made. Traveling all over the United States, going and talking to people face to face. So we don't have to complete our 9th step to say we're recovered. What it tells us in the 9th step is we'll be amazed before we're halfway through with the 9th step. What's before we're halfway through? Define before halfway. Can anyone define that for me?
Beginning?
The beginning is before halfway. Yeah, if I make one phone call, make one sincere amend, I can be amazed that moment. So this is not something you have to get all your amends made right out of the gate. And this is also something where you don't want your manager, that guy we talk about on page 61, resting satisfaction and happiness out of this world. If he only manages well to get all those amends made, you see how your disease could creep right back up on you? Right there. Oh, I'm the manager now. I got bills to pay. Just stop. It's going to take a long time. Take those slowly with the direction of another person that's on a similar spiritual journey, perhaps your sponsor or your spiritual advisor. And then finally, we're looking at steps 10, 11, and 12 that we maintain daily to make sure we don't get ourselves back in this mess. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in tomorrow's meeting. With all that being said, I think I probably have gotten a thorough presentation of this. And I guess the next indicated step would be for us to say the Lord's Prayer. Who makes the miracle happen?
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Keep coming back. It works when you work it.
So work it like it's worth it.
Well, welcome everybody. My name is John. I'm a recovered alcoholic.
Morning, John.
Morning,
John.
I announce myself as recovered in accordance with page 90 of the AA Big Book. Welcome to the Alcoholics Anonymous Key to Our Future Wednesday morning workshop of the Fourth Column, Fourth Dimension group. I am your speaker this morning. If the workshop finishes early, we'll use the remaining time as a general discussion based on the workshop topic. Would all who care to join me in a moment of silence for those that are still sick and suffering? Let's say the set-aside prayer together. God, please help me set aside everything I think I know about myself, my disease, these steps, and especially you, for an open mind in a new experience with myself, my disease, these steps, and especially you. Show me the way of patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. Amen. Our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to the causes and conditions. Big Book, page 64. It does not matter what substances you may or may not have used. They are all different. But the solution is always the same. The proper application of the 12 steps is presented in the Big Book. And always remember, contempt prior to investigation is a bar against all knowledge. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions.